Character analysis. Proportions of head, an indication of soul's age. By Manly P. Hall. Students of occultism often ask concerning their position in the great wheel of evolution. To what racial characteristics are they tied by their own growth and unfoldment, and to what type do they belong? There are 3 general types of heads in the world at the present time, and there are also 3 general temperaments expressing the unfoldment of consciousness. We will call them the objective, perceptive, and reflective types, illustrated by the 3 drawings of eggs. Figure 1 represents the lowest stage of human expression. It is the egg with the point upward and the greatest width at point A, in the lower section of the egg. Figure 2 represents the second or average head, the greatest width at point B, just above the center section of the egg. Figure 3 represents the philosophic head with the greatest width at point C, the upper section of the egg. Development through the expression in daily life of temperament and trait and the exercising of brain organs is the basis of this expansion. These 3 eggs represent types of human faces. Figure 1 is commonly called the Lemurian face, for those whose heads have the greatest breadth and strength below the eyes and through the jaws and the chops, are the lowest on the scale of human differentiation. Such an individual has absorbed the consciousness of less than 300 Earth lives, out of an approximate 800 necessary for one life wave. It is the face of gratification, the face of animal propensity, the face of the glutton, the slovenly person, the human hog, and is always true to type. Such individuals live for the pure joy of eating and sleeping and are rarely capable of finer sentiment. Their lower brain organs are always the most developed, especially the cerebellum at the back of the skull. The organic quality of such types is usually low. They are apoplectic, stubborn but not intelligent, shirk hard work, can usually be found surrounded by juicy beefsteaks, and live purely for the gratification of the senses in some form. This type is that of the earthy man. He usually has the Taurian properties predominating, and his expression does not often rise above materiality. Figure 2 is that of the martial type, usually expressing the vital and combative system. This type has the greatest breadth directly over or between the ears, is usually powerfully developed in the perceptive system, is observant, self-reliant, sometimes domineering, and if the breadth is just a little below the middle line, such types are often pugnastic. These are usually attuned to Mars, make good soldiers, military people, policemen, detectives, and are also found in our commercial and business avenues of life. They are Atlantean in temperament, and their types can be found to run between 300 to 500 incarnations. They are not noted for their philosophy, but are generally shrewd and discriminating. Such individuals live purely in the human side of things, but are decidedly superior to the animal man of Figure 1. They are of the concrete mental type. Figure 3, on the other hand, is pure Aryan, and is that type of head found on those whom we might call the older souls, or those who are on the way back to union with their source. The highest part of the head predominates. The mind is that of a philosopher, a dreamer, a poet, or a musician. The entire head is ethical, and the upper part very often appears as an overpowering mountain, which makes the lower part of the face seem almost insignificant. This is the Mercurial and Neptunian head, and is always found on those who have found and seen light in some way. The best head for our race is the egg-shaped with the largest end upward. It indicates one who has risen out of the lower animal worlds. It indicates that the individual is at least 600 incarnations along the path, and is therefore well on the homeward trail. Figure 4 represents the human nose seen from in front. The distance between the eyes is always a measurement of soul growth. The more closely the eyes are set together, the lower the position of the ego in consciousness. The further apart the eyes, the older the soul. Individuals analyzing the organs of individuality which occupy the space directly between the eyes at the bridge of the nose realize that the growth of this organ spreads the eyes apart, and that the spread of the organs of vision is the measurement of the spiritual age. The length of the nose is also especially important, and all things being equal, the long, straight nose is the symbol of power. A well-balanced face also demands that the distance between the base of the nose and the point of the chin be approximately the same as that from the bridge to the end of the nose. When this is the case, we have a well-balanced, well-organized brain with sufficient courage to fight the battles of the world. The nose is threefold in general type, as in Figure 4a. The nose marked 1 is called the nose of erudition, and is certain to be inquisitive, more or less combative, iconoclastic in temperament, but usually backed with tremendous power, either mental, spiritual, or physical, usually one of the first two. 2 is artistic and literary, but neither as philosophical as 1 nor as deep a thinker. If the nose is long and straight, the life will be long and straight, while the hooked nose type will investigate and be given to sarcasm, as illustrated by Dante. 3 is the uncertain nose, in which the arch sinks. This is sometimes called the turn up, and is an invariable symbol of changeability, variability, and what is commonly known as temperament, often concealing an uncertain disposition. Briefly defined: 1, analysis, 2, rigidity, and 3, inconstancy. Figure 5 represents the profile of the human face. It is divided into 4 sections. The length from the base of the nose to the chin denotes physical power. From the bridge to the nose, to the end of the nose, mental power and individuality. From the bridge of the nose to the top of the forehead represents the abstract mental, while the dome of the head is the spiritual home, where are found the organs of altruism, ideality, and inspiration. In other words, beginning with the bottom, we have earth, water, fire, and air, which were the 4 elements of the ancients. The position of the ear is also very important. It should be of the same size as the nose and occupy the same position in the latitude of the head. When the top of the ear is below the bridge of the nose, we have the criminal. The line of incident, the middle line of Figure 5, is the polar line of the human face, and in a well-balanced head should touch the greatest protuberance of the forehead and the point of the chin with an absolutely perpendicular shaft. In the prehistoric man, the line of incident, in order to strike the point of chin and forehead, had to slant at an angle backward, thus demonstrating unequal mental development with a predomination of the animal temperament. On the unbalanced thinker, the line of incident strikes forward, which shows powerful mentality, but insufficient physical strength. All things being taken equally, a symmetrical head is symbolical of power. The size, shape, and quality of the human head differs with the quality and size of the body, and 2 things are necessary in order to give the best service to the owner. First, that the brain be well developed and well balanced, and secondly, that the body be large enough to support the brain. The length of life is ascertained by a small protuberance directly behind and slightly lower than the center of the ear. Not the mastoid process, but a depression of protuberance on the surface of it. An individual with this area strongly developed may safely expect long life, even though he should eat pig iron and 10-penny nails, while those with a depression there will succumb to a passing draught. In Figure 6 are shown 3 types of chins. A, the semi-square chin has great musical promise and indicates possibility of a great singer. B, the purely square chin is usually stubborn, obstinate, and animalistic. C, the pointed chin is timid, vain, feministic in either sex, lacks courage of conviction, is hysterical and easily influenced by other people, and is often spiteful but is seldom dangerous. It is usually found on the faces of dreamers, mystics, poets, and those whose temperaments go to color, sentiment, and to the fine arts. Full lips are indicative of an artistic and emotional temperament, while thin lips are invariably the sign of mental, spiritual, or physical conservation, and strictness to form, custom, habit, and idea. The width of the nostrils indicates the strength of the lungs. Those with narrow nostrils are subject to tuberculosis, bronchitis, and generally have poor health. The eyes are especially important. The long, thin eye is philosophic. The eye which is naturally partly covered by the lids is rather secretive. A widely opened eye denotes lack of thought, while the eye which turns up slightly under the outside corner indicates incarnations in the Orient. Eyebrows that turn up on the ends are usually sarcastic and saturnine. Eyebrows that are exceptionally bushy tend to legality and ponderosity of temperament. Those that meet in the center are symbolical of ungovernable temper. Straight eyebrows are generally indicative of power, while those gently curved run to the artistic and romantic. The hair is also important, its fineness or coarseness showing the position of the ego in evolution. Straight hair is generally shrewd and calculating, wavy hair open-minded and honest, curly hair romantic and changeable, while very finely curled hair that lies in kinks is usually vain and untrustworthy, especially in heart affairs. Black hair goes with a sharp temper, more so if the eyes are black. Brown hair in the darker shades, all things of the face agreeing, tends to philosophy and thought. Light brown hair, able, eccentric, seldom reflective. Red is more romantic. Golden hair is change hair. Has the reputation of denoting an element of pepper in the temperament, but this is not always the case, and often showing a susceptibility to poor health and general lassitude. Wrinkles usually denote thought and also a run-down physical condition. Their location is helpful in proving whether a person be a pessimist or an optimist. Those in the cheeks and running across the forehead are optimistic, while those at the corners of the mouth and the corners of the eyes are usually pessimistic. The head which tilts forward when walking is philosophic, that which tilts backward is egotistic, and that which is cocked on one side is sarcastic or else shows an unequal development of brain convolutions, or possibly an affliction of the ears. In the use of these character readings for the purpose of self-diagnosis, attention should be given to the weak features of character and effort made toward the attainment of the stronger. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. He who uses this method for the purpose of reading others should also seek to gain a greater understanding and sympathy with the nature expressed, and seek to harmonize with the contrasts in conflicting natures. Most elaborate and most beautiful volume ever printed on Coast. Delays in publication, Masonic, Hermetic, and Rosicrucian symbolical philosophy will result in a better book. Printer, plate maker, and artist pronounce it unique. That the encyclopedic outline of Masonic, Hermetic, and Rosicrucian symbolical philosophy by Manly P. Hall, which many on the West Coast are eagerly awaiting, will not only be the most elaborate volume ever printed on the Pacific Coast, but will also be one of the most beautiful from the artistic standpoint. Mr. Hall has been industriously at work upon it since the first of the year. As time goes on, intensive research has brought to light a number of important subjects which he had not contemplated incorporating into the book. But the importance of the subjects has caused him to change somewhat the original plan, and the result will be a book considerably greater and more complete than the one first outlined. The changes which have been made have approximately doubled the cost of production, so that whereas the original book was being published at a loss, this new and improved outline will result in a volume costing in the neighborhood of $50,000 to produce. Bacon-Shakespeare controversy. While these changes will result in a slight delay in the publication of the work, it is believed by Mr. Hall that the increased value to the reader will more than compensate for the few weeks necessary to make these important changes. In a matter of this kind, speed is not the most desirable thing. The value of the work lies in its accurate and complete analysis of the subjects discussed, and it is believed the discoveries resulting from further research will double the scope and value of the book. Among some of the chapters which have been inserted as the result of rewriting and arranging the book is one on the Bacon-Shakespeare cryptogram, including a previously unpublished cipher key to the play of Cymbeline. There's also a chapter devoted to Francis Bacon and the Rosicrucians, and one specially set aside to the symbols of the Mohammedan faith. It is also intended to incorporate one chapter on the mysteries of the North and Central American Indians, presenting among other rare diagrams a faithful reproduction of American Indian Masonic trestleboard, showing 2 degrees of the Midwin mysteries. Rare books. It is thought that a complete alchemical manuscript, the only one of its kind in existence, will be published. Careful investigation of the museums of Europe failed to disclose any document even of a similar nature. It is illustrated with 26 pages of hand-drawn watercolor pictures showing the symbolism of Hermeticism and alchemy. This original volume was secured from Austria. Through the courtesy of Philip Hackett of San Francisco, the owner of the only copy known, there will be included the work on Pythagorean mathematics, quotations from the finest and rarest volume on the subject in existence, of which it is said there is no copy in the British Museum. This work is Thomas Taylor's Theoretic Arithmetic, being largely a series of translations from the Greek. A great number of rare Hermetic diagrams have been redrawn, which, while it adds considerably to the expense of the work, greatly increases the beauty and legibility of the document. The work is progressing as rapidly as conditions permit, but many serious interruptions have occurred during the year. It would have been possible to hurry the book through, thus ensuring more rapid delivery of the volume, but it is quite certain that those who have invested in this work will be glad to wait the few additional weeks necessary to add this new and rare material and have it properly indexed and arranged. The contract for the book has been given, the paper and materials have been ordered, including several $1,000s worth of type, which is now being set, and by the time this paper reaches you, the elaborate system of indexing will be underway. Outstanding achievement. Therefore, while there have been delays caused by sickness and unavoidable conditions, the volume is coming along well. Hundreds of the zinc etchings and small cuts have already been made, and the bibliography has already passed the 300 mark. All of those concerned with the production of this volume, the printer, the designer, the typesetter, the editor, the plate maker, to say nothing of the author, are trying in every way possible to make the volume an outstanding achievement in printing, publishing, and the matter treated. All are enthusiastic, and the consensus of opinion of all concerned that it is the most elaborate piece of printing that has ever been attempted on the Pacific coast. Does science add to our ignorance? Mount Wilson's new telescope. Mount Wilson is the proud possessor of a new 100-inch lens telescope. Another supreme effort is to be made by the scientific world in its search for knowledge. But double the size of the great lens in this new telescope and double it again, and there will still be many things that science will not be able to discover. The scientific world is struggling for the edification of mankind, seeking knowledge in all fields for the development of the human mind. It will only take them a few seconds, with this new and powerful lens, to discover more than they will ever understand. Though they delve among distant universes or in the mysteries of the electron, they are forever limited to the world of form. Science fears the speculative mind, which seeks to define the invisible. It fears the philosopher who is always in the advance of science. Grinding an immense lens is a long, slow, and difficult process. Many must be made that one may be perfect, but science will never grind a lens with which to see the human soul. Science can discover many things, but will never be able to fill the emptiness in the life of an individual, can never give him the knowledge of self which is essential to peace and happiness. Science is all objective, outside, in the world of forms, the not-self. But sometimes science will find man, having found the universe. By analogy will discover man. Philosophy discovers man first and the universe by analogy. Science knows no telescope great enough to reach all space, but man, through philosophy, may reach all through himself. It isn't what we discover in the world of form, but what it means to us that counts. No mind can grasp the tremendous distances discovered in space. 1 billion miles is only 10 miles and some more. Beyond that, the mind falters. How many can measure 100 feet on the earth, or even 1 foot accurately on paper? The more the scientist finds, the more he knows there are things that he don't know. We are only adding new things to be ignorant about. The great problem and the measure of all things is their application to the needs and the unfoldment of the individual. Religion is another problem. Religion is one form of thought that can solve the problem of the internal man, but it likewise is only adding to the sum of its own ignorance. seeking, seeking, seeking without, and finding more things than they will ever understand until they, like the philosopher, go within. Universities are interesting, but oneself is the greatest object of interest. What will a new star that will be discovered in the new 100-inch lens on Mount Wilson have to do with the price of bread and butter? In knowledge of self alone lies happiness. What shall man do, and how shall he do it in harmony with nature? Religion and philosophy both come nearer to the problem than do science. Science knows more things, but no way to use them for individual happiness. Everything, however, does have its effect and meaning for the individual. The effect of all things fitted together as a great puzzle will reveal deity and its relation to the individual. Turn your attention to self, the divine part of man, the common denominator of all things in the universe, the common power of all things. A scientist might be conceived of that would know all things, all facts, but knowing them all and knowing not the one cause back of all, would be helpless in real helpfulness to man. But if you know the one cause, you will know all the effects. We are discovering more and more power and putting it to work. Someday we will have the power to do anything of which we can conceive. But if man has this power before he learns self and the control of self, he will destroy everything. This divine energy may be locked in a unit small enough to be held in the hand of a child and released so simply that a child can use it. But woe unto the race if a child minds hold it. Then will science realize its mistake, and then will religion and philosophy realize their mistake in permitting the material development before the spiritual, for destruction will follow the childish use of the power. And where are the minds that are not childish? The great lesson taught by Quo Vadis centers around our responsibilities in the world. Either each individual must carry on his part of the world's work, or else some other one must bear his burden. On the Appian Way, the apostle, leaving Rome, beheld the vision of Christ returning to the eternal city. Falling upon his knees, the apostle cried out, Quo Vadis, Domini, which means, Whither goest thou, Master? And the answer is given him, which to all who, failing to shoulder the responsibilities of life, seek to evade their duties. When we neglect an opportunity to do good, when we evade the hard things of life and seek to shift our burdens to the other shoulders, when we live for ourselves alone and leave suffering humanity, then indeed we meet the Master returning to the labors which we should have performed, mayhap to die again for his people, and on our heads shall rest the blame for his death. The pleasures of reading are, of course, in good part pleasures of the imagination, but they are just as natural and actual as pleasures of the sense, and are often more accessible and more lasting. Charles W. Eliot. Evolution, a Prize Essay by S. J. Brownson, M.D., B.D., F.T.S. This essay won the prize of $10 offered by the Los Angeles Examiner for the best article on evolution, and was published in its issue of August 14, 1922. The fact that within 75 years all the colleges of the world, nearly all the scientists, and most of the leading educators have accepted evolution, either as a working hypothesis or as a fact, is the most encouraging event in the history of civilization, because it places the study of all the phenomena of life on a scientific basis. Hitherto it has been largely in the hands of theologians who are at war with scientists. 2, because it secures to man perfect liberty in the investigation of all the laws and forces of nature. This is necessary for rapid progress. 3, because it has established as a fact the law of cause and effect, and the immanence by evolution of life, spirit, God in all nature, instead of creationism by an extra-mundane anthropomorphic God who rules by arbitrary power. 4, because it has demonstrated the unity and sacredness of all life, the brotherhood of all men, and the absolute justice, wisdom, and love of God alike for all. 5, because it has established the fact of the orderly sequential development of all life, from the simple to the complex, through an infinitude of adjustments and forms that are always changing to conform to the expanding life within. 6, because it lays bare the causes of war, poverty, crime, disease, and all abnormal conditions, and points the remedy with the strongest incentives for its use. 7, Because looking upon all nature as an inspired Bible, it unravels the tangled web of life and solves its problem in harmony with reason and the ethics of science. 8. Because it places man where he belongs, as a spiritual being in the scale of evolving intelligence, the epitome of the universe, a God in the making, in harmony with the example and teaching of Christ, who was an evolutionist. Christ was an evolutionist. Proof of this statement, with which the essay closes, is desired by many people. Here it comes from the Bible itself. 1. What is evolution? As defined in our 3 great unabridged dictionaries, Webster, the Century, the Standard, it is development, growth, unfolding, opening out, etc., always from the simple to the complex, and by inherent sentiment life. It applies to everything in the universe, from an atom or an electron to the cosmical system. Herbert Spencer, the world's greatest philosopher, defines it as the integration of matter and concomitant dissipation of motion. 2. What does the Bible say about this? While the word evolution is not found in it, because, like many other words now in common use, it had not been coined when the book was made, other words conveying exactly the same idea were used. Consult any unabridged Greek and Hebrew analytical concordance or Bible textbook, looking up the root meaning of such words as these: to create, make, form, fashion, build, grow, etc., and their derivatives and synonyms, and you will find that evolution, as understood by science today, is taught and illustrated on every page of the book. 3. All of Christ's teachings are in harmony with this fact. His 38 parables illustrate the development of his kingdom, or the growth of Christian character, in exact accordance with this divine law of progress. Hundreds of passages might be cited to prove this, such as Math, chapter 13, chapter 6:28, Jano, chapter 50, Mark, chapter 4:26-35, etc., Jano, chapter 10:30, chapter 5:17-47, chapter 14:9, etc., prove his identity with God, his Father, and all nature. Hundreds of passages prove his humanity as well as his divinity. 4. Darwinism should not be confounded with evolution. The best authorities hold that monkeys were not our ancestors, much to their credit, for monkeys do not kill each other or carry on barbarous wars as men do. The Bible, and especially the life and teachings of Christ, when studied in the light of creative, progressive evolution, using figures of speech, allegory, and symbolism, as its writers did, and for religious and not scientific purposes, is a more illuminating and wonderful book than ever. To prohibit the teaching of evolution in our schools is absolutely unchristian and subversive of our civilization. Faust, The Eternal Drama, by Manly P. Hall. In taking up the study of the drama by Goethe and the opera by Gounod, it is well for us to consider the historical character of Faust. Very few people realize that this strange individual ever lived, and yet upon investigation there is very little doubt that such a person did exist during the 15th and 16th century. Among magical writings we find the book of Dr. Faust, a short thesis on which he explains his invocation of spirits and his pact with the evil one. Many strange stories are told concerning him which, however, are unanimous in their conclusion, that in the end he was destroyed by the entity to which he had bound himself. The story received little attention until Goethe, a master of alchemy, built around it the immortal drama, which is now familiar to the public. There are few operas that contain more food for spiritual and intellectual thought than Faust. The present form of the legend is undoubtedly an outpouring of the mystery schools, with which many of the great authors and poets have been connected. It is the symbolical and mystic rather than the literal interpretation in which we are interested, which brings clearly before the mind of the student one of the greatest principles which the modern alchemist and student of occult arts must face. First, the student must realize that the whole drama takes place within his own being, which he overlooks because he cannot see it. The eternal struggles, the eternal combinations of elements, principles, and expressions of unfoldment constitute the most wonderful of all dramas. And this has been given to the world under the symbol of Faust, and is packed with Mephistopheles. The character in the drama, Faust. In Faust, the ancient philosopher sitting in his gloomy laboratory surrounded by dusty bones and weird and curious books of ancient history, we find one angle of human consciousness. In him we see the human mind, the analytical mind, the intellectual occultist, the power of science, the mystery of thought. All of these we see symbolized in Faust. He is an analyzer of effects, seeking to find causes by the power of concrete reason, seeking with the eyes of form to view the worlds of spirit. There are many today who stand as Faust stood, with all his lore a fool no wiser than before. He is the mind incarnate. There are many students today who have studied books, listened and learned, experimented and wound themselves up in intellectuality, and yet forever they fail. They can quote figures, they know the ages of worlds, and still the great secret of the alchemist eludes them, and in the darkness of ever deeper perplexity they labor surrounded by problems they cannot solve and mysteries with which they cannot cope. How long will science stand as Faust stood, an admitted failure in its attempts to solve anything it cannot analyze? Faust failed to find the true meaning of alchemy as he labored eternally with things outside of himself. He built his furnaces, but his retorts and his Bunsen burners only led him into deeper quandaries and greater despair. In Faust, the true spiritual man was imprisoned, crucified beneath the power of intellectuality. The mind is man's greatest blessing, but when it masters the thing it should obey and serve, it surrounds and imprisons the life until, as Faust, the yearning breaks out in his eternal cry. Woe is me, still prisoned in the gloom of this abhorred and musty room, where heaven's dear light itself doth pass, but dimly through the painted glass, hemmed in by volumes thick with dust, a prey to worms and mouldering rust, and to the high vaults topmost bound with smoky paper compassed round, with boxes round three piled in glass, and many a useless instrument, with an old ancestral lumber blent. This is my world, a world, alas! And dost thou ask why heaves thy heart with tightening pressure in thy breast? Why the dull ache will not depart, by which the life pulse is oppressed? Instead of nature's living sphere, created for mankind of old, brute skeletons surround thee here, and dead men's bones in smoke and mold. Many students have not reached a place where they cry out in their misery as Faust cried out, but they are in an intellectual rut which will inevitably bring about the same result. Men cannot reach heaven by thought alone, although it is true that thought binds God to man. But to this thought must be added other things. The hermit and the recluse and those buried in their studies are losing the great battle, as they have gone away from the world. They have left practical life for theoretical things, and it was not for this end that man came into being. He came to labor as well as learn. He came to evolve not only intellectual faculties by the mystic and spiritual. He must learn compassion, love, and faith, and blend them if he would know the mystery of creation. The one who knows the most is not always the wisest. If he were, the story of Faust could never have taken place. But so surely as the pendulum swings in one direction to produce a mental genius, as in Faust, it will swing back again and produce a degenerate. This is an age-old truth which the student must learn, and as we read Faust in this light, we shall see the playing out of human emotions, which finally are blended in mutual understanding. But the path is often long and weary, especially for those who, like Faust, are crystallized in ruts. When man becomes a slave to his intellect, he becomes unbalanced, and we find those who destroy for the love of analyzing the thing they kill. They will, in truth, sell their souls to the devil for the thing they want. And there are thousands who stand today as Faust stood, intellectual giants, but in life failures, who must stand apart from all the world listening in the depth of their own darkened being, to the laughing songs of those from whom they have separated themselves, by allowing the truly human to starve and dying give its being to feed an unbalanced mind. Marguerite, as Faust symbolizes the human mind with its deep mysterious workings, so Marguerite symbolizes the heart, the impulsive system, as balanced against the somber, reflective, analytical system. The great human tragedy of life is eternally played out between these two, and it is usually the heart that pays the greatest price for its unfoldment and growth. Raised among the cloisters of faith, Marguerite, without experience, without practical knowledge of life or living problems, becomes the easy prey of Faust and his scheming companion. The beautiful mystic path of faith, as it is personified in the character of Marguerite, is one that each aspiring soul must walk, but it is filled with suffering and uncertainty until reason and knowledge are added, and the simple innocence of childhood gives place to the broader virtue of understanding. Nature and its laws apparently conspire eternally against those who do not understand them, but this is not in truth nature's conspiracy. It is rather the price which man, regardless of his ignorance, must pay for the violation of a law which is no respecter of persons. The heart of man and his finer sentiments are worthy and beautiful, but these sentiments often destroy the thing that they love the most, and until the path of the heart is strengthened by the mind, enriched with the experience of action and the fruits of labor, it is not in a position to fulfill its part in the great plan. For thousands of years, ignorance has been considered innocence, and those who are sheltered from the world have been called virtuous. But nothing can be further from the true meaning of the word than this application. In knowledge, balance, and years of conscientious experience and mastered emotions rest the basis of true virtue. It is only those who have passed through life and cleansed themselves who have been virtuous. Those who have been sheltered, as Marguerite was, are merely the ignorant preys of cunning and worldly wisdom, not only to their own detriment, but to the detriment of others. Marguerite symbolizes the hopelessly impractical phase of life, which we find often among those who claim spirituality. Many students know little of the first principles of life and less of their reason for being, and yet in their ignorance they pride themselves upon the fact that they do not need to know. This mistaken idea is responsible for an eternal tragedy, as old as life itself, and so long as man remains in his present state of ignorance, he will be forced to bow before that which knows. And instead of rising up in wrath against his overlord, he must transmute his ignorance into knowledge. Therefore, the trials of Marguerite were as necessary to her salvation as were the repentance and agony of Faust necessary to him, that he might learn to balance his intellectuality with the spiritual and mystic nature of Marguerite. This eternal battle is as old as time itself, and it will continue until knowledge with all its glory realizes the sweet simplicity of the mystic path of faith, as walked by Marguerite, and having learned the lessons of life, unites itself in an eternal union with the elements which it must always fight until it understands. Again, in this drama we see the eternal battle of science and religion. Faust, the philosopher, buried in his concrete knowledge, unable to appreciate the true elements of spiritual faith, typifying science, while Marguerite, standing upon the church steps, represents the eternal cry of the mystic, to believe without knowing, to adore without questioning, and to accept all nature as the manifestation of an unknown, whose laws it is heresy to examine. Today the battle is still being fought out, and while science walks forward with ever-quickening strides, it still combats religious ideals, and religion seems unable to broaden out to a realization of the place of science in the plan of being. The great tragedy of Faust, as played out in man, his intuition, posited against his intellect, must continue its unbalanced career until heart and mind are blended in the alchemical marriage of the philosopher, when instead of imposing each upon the other, they unite for the betterment of each, the heart to believe and hope, and the mind to make possible the realization of that hope. One to build its air castle of rainbow tints, and the other in a practical way to make possible the perpetuation of the dream. This is the final destiny of the eternal battle, when fire and water being harmonized, each realizing the value of the other, man will unify both phases of his being into one great truth, which will endure to the end of time. Mephistopheles, Walpurgis Night, The Tragedy of Faust, Part 2, Manly P. Hall. Mephistopheles. Few people understand the devil's place in the great plan, and fewer still have learned to appreciate and reverence that great natural principle, the most abused of all the divine's manifestations. The keynote of physical matter is inertia. Expression of energy is only possible on this plane of nature as the result of effort, and mankind is prone to shirk activity. Consequently, he considers As evil all things which bring with them the necessity of exertion, mental, physical, or spiritual. And as the devil, so called, he is unpopular with a large percentage of people, in spite of the fact that he was especially chosen by the Lord as man's most constant companion. The devil is always dressed in red from head to foot, the red being symbolical of the blood and iron of Mars, the energy-giving principle of the universe. It is energy which builds all things. It is energy which makes possible every manifestation of human life. And just so surely as energy creates action, which promotes growth, just so surely the misapplication of this energy destroys. The devil is nothing more or less than misplaced energy, which energy is always misplaced by the individual himself, who invokes the demon by misapplying his God-given powers. This emotional demon can be transmuted, as is told in the second part of the drama of Faust, and the same power which destroys mind, soul, and body then builds our homes and gives expression to our constructive ideals. This energy coursing through the body of all living things is the light-bearer of the universe. But when perverted for selfish ends, it becomes a ravenous demon which slowly devours and destroys all over whom it gains control. There are two ways of bringing upon mankind the curse of Mephistopheles. The first is the careful misapplication of energy by the knowing, scientific mind, which consciously sells its soul to its lower emotions for the gratification of desires. The second is the result of ignorance, where the human soul, not realizing its danger, allows itself to be tempted by the emotional being. It is the lower emotional body in man with its passions and hates which is symbolized by the devil. And these emotions, while they are invoked by man, if he once gives himself over to them, soon become his master and destroy him with their blazing fire. In Faust, the devil is called the spirit of negation, and this is true. He is also the spirit of perversion, as the devil in every case is the right thing in the wrong place. In man's hands rests the regeneration of the evil one, the eternal tempter, who in the last analysis constitutes a divine urge for the greater good. If we hate evil, we are promoting evil with evil, as hate is food for hate, and an evil intention towards evil gives the undesirable ever greater strength. We must find the way of working that Faust found, which in the end resulted in his eternal salvation and forgiveness. Man must master the lower phases of all his bodies, which until they are mastered are eternally betraying his higher nature. His heart, Marguerite, and his brain, Faust, should be masters of the forces which animate them, but man is seldom master of his own bodies, as nearly all creatures are slaves of emotion, which is represented as the jaunty, scarlet-clad figure who is always ready to gratify the lower at the expense of the higher, but who in turn, when mastered, becomes the willing follower of good as before he was the instigator of evil. When man masters his lower body with its emotions, hates, and fears, instead of being a slave to it, he then breaks the bond which ties him to Mephistopheles, as this creature which he has invoked in his own lower nature, and until he masters this nature, he must always be a slave to it, and it will lead him to misery and death. The mastery of bodies and the finer and finer adjustments of bodies are the things for which man is eternally seeking. Every expression of the spiritual inner urge brings closer the day when he shall be master of his own temple. But when he fails in his divine obligation, he then sells his soul and his spiritual consciousness to the lower nature, and like Faust, becomes a blight upon the very earth, a betrayer of his own higher nature and a slave of vice. Millions of people have unconsciously sold their souls to Mephistopheles, who still believe that they are masters of themselves, but who are the slaves of habit. All who are mastered by temper are the conscious servants of Mephistopheles, and will remain so until they take the very devil himself and make him work for good. Then we find that he is as useful a companion as constructive energy, as he was a betrayer when he manifested through destructive elements. The tragedy of Faust. This tragedy in 5 acts is played out through the regions of the 5 senses by mind, spirit, body, soul, and emotions, which constitute the cast of this eternal drama. All the elements of human passion and desire, from the divine prologue at the footstool of God to the infernal Sabbath of Walpurgis Night, are phases in the expression of the ever-evolving individuality of man. In it, we find that the human spirit of man, Faust, the one hidden in the laboratory of crystallized vehicles, where the light shines through but dimly, seeks greater liberty and expression, and so invokes the spirit of the earth and the higher powers to liberate him from the narrow confines of his laboratory. But he is not yet prepared for the higher liberation, and so seeks expression through the lower. We find the human spiritual consciousness in man pledging its soul to the bodies of emotion at the present time in the world, where thousands of people, millions in fact, are searching for happiness, the eternal goal of the lower man. In many ways, humanity seeks to forget its cares and sorrows by drowning them in emotional excesses. But eternally, its misery is only sleeping to wake again until the individual takes the path which leads him upward to the light. The vehicle which Faust, the human spirit, decides to use and pervert to his own ends represents Marguerite, the body, which it destroys in order that it may carry on its degeneracy. And the inevitable result of this mental and emotional excesses is the destruction of the body, which he betrays, and a karmic reaction of sickness and death. We see this exemplified around us where the burning of the candle at both ends results in the destruction of the body, as symbolized by the betrayal of Marguerite. But this betrayal and the resultant suffering bring with them growth and life as we see it today. The betrayal of the lower by the higher, as it is around us at every moment, brings with it constructive results, as is symbolized by Faust, who as the result of his final repentance earns the right to eternal salvation, as Marguerite is also immortalized when she masters the temptations of the emotional man. Walpurgis Night. There is no more impressive feature in the entire opera than what is called the Ride to Hell and the Witches' Sabbath, where Faust and the devil ride through the storms and thunderclouds to where the lower emotional creatures of our creation are battling, twisting, and writhing in demoniacal frenzy. This ride to hell, as it is called, is the inevitable result of the pact in which Faust, the human spirit, binds himself to his emotional body. The result of this union and the degeneracy which comes with it is that the spinal currents and powers in man go down to the spine to the darkness of the lower man on the ride to hell. And here in the conscious centers of the lower emotions is celebrated the witches' Sabbath. When man becomes the slave of emotion, his spiritual centers above the meridian point fail to function, and his consciousness is carried downward to the centers of the lower body, where among the seething flames of the sacral plexuses, the lower passion centers, he celebrates the orgies of the lower astral planes. The entire drama is wound around the one series of natural laws, as are all dramas of the universe, this particular phase being the price that man must pay when he allows the lower bodies to master the higher principles. In most every thought and action of our lives, we are betraying our own being, which betrayal brings with it years and often lives of suffering. If man will only realize his duty to his own bodies and theirs to him, he will not have to pass through the terrible drama which Goethe, the great mystic, had presented in the story of Faust. But when he abuses any part of his being, he must pay as Faust paid, when he sold his higher spiritual nature to his lower bodies and betrayed the principles within himself, leaving behind him a stream of suffering and death. Faust is still being played out in the world as it was played out in the worlds above, which we have recorded in the fall of the angels. Man, by the perversion of his life essences, created the devil, and now he must suffer in anguish as the slave of his creation until he redeems himself as Faust did in the last act of Walpurgis Night, known as the second half of the drama. In the first part of the drama, Faust buries his higher nature in the process of involution. In the second, he lifts that which he destroyed and redeems that which he perverted. The end. Poison Liquor by Manly P. Hall, reported by Harry S. Gerhardt. Every problem of a civilization concerns every member of that civilization. Religion has its answers to problems, science has its answers, and philosophy has its answers. Philosophy combines the best of the others, and we should expect a reasoned, balanced solution of a problem from that source. And we have the right to expect a practical working solution, one that will really work if applied. So let us consider the great question of prohibition, bootlegging, and its latest aspect, poison liquor, poisoned by a government to prevent its use. The removal of alcoholics will undoubtedly be of immense value to posterity. How can it most effectively be done? The great mass of humanity do not appreciate the efforts made in its behalf. Play is that which we want to do, and work is that which we have to do. Humanity rebels against that which it must do, as the small boy rebels against medicine. He just knows it is awful on principle. Thus, the forcing of anything upon humanity is distasteful to humanity, and it immediately wants that which is denied to it. Humanity is gradually growing to a truer and nobler state, but a poor way to help it is to force something upon it. The user of alcohol is slowly committing suicide. The old sot said, "It is such a pleasing way to die." Thus it may seem in the early stages, but the latter are anything but pleasant. The law has said that intoxicants shall not be distributed. But behold, a new industry has been established, a national institution, refined, creditable, whose only unfortunate angle is in getting caught. This elite industry of bootlegging is sanctioned by the community and is patronized by the elect, and is thus probably the largest single institution in America, an unorganized organism. It would require several Woolworth buildings to house its offices if such were possible. This gigantic industry is the strongest advocate of prohibition and without exception will vote dry. They are the largest group of fundamental dries. Their business depends upon it. This institution is preying upon humanity, using all the improved methods of rapid poisoning, and the government is asked to help them. The law is now established and must be enforced or be re-legislated. Vast numbers of people do not feel that it is a crime to break law of which they do not approve. The result is that law-breaking has been carried into every channel of endeavor. A general disregard for all law is the result of prohibition. Therefore, we have a general increase of crime of all kinds. Now, is it advisable to poison alcohol to prevent its being used? Is the crime of indulgence in bootleg liquor worthy of a death penalty? For that is what it amounts to. The bootlegger will use it just the same, and the drinker will drink it just the same. Death will result, and the government has sentenced him to death. Now, why will the individual disregard these drastic measures and risk his own life? The individual does not realize the necessity of self-preservation. He has been told many times, but doesn't believe it. We cannot learn from the actions of others, and education, while it is certain, is a long, slow progress, and no real effort has been made to educate the individual. The whole prohibition question has grown until no one seems to know just what to do with it. The government doesn't seem to know, nor do they seem to care very much. Someone suggests more poison. It is an interesting thing when a government as strong and powerful as that of the United States of America, or as it should be, should find it necessary to put poison in anything as the only solution to a great problem. We are working with millions of people who, according to government statistics, have minds of 12 to 13-year-old children. 25% of them can barely read and write. Nearly 90% have a warped moral value. 10% only are sufficiently developed to preserve self, are able to say no to the cravings of the lower nature. If these millions were self-controlled, the government could poison liquor, and every man would keep himself from drinking. But these millions are not self-controlled. They want liquor, and wanting it will drink it, and never count the cost. It is necessary to educate humanity to a certain point before you can direct him to a certain end. Humanity needs help and remedies of many kinds, but the government is making very little progress in this problem confronting it. The government has not yet given an intelligent presentation of advantages of the prohibition law. Instead of teaching these advantages, it has sought to enforce it against the individual's disbelief in that law. Propaganda has done many things and is being used constantly to do many more things. And if some of it were directed toward educating the individual in the exact facts of the matter, those minds which are really worth would disentangle themselves. If some of the millions spent in useless enforcement were spent in flooding the United States with facts, much more good would be done. In time, the world can be educated, but it must be shown why, in language it can understand. Those worthwhile will listen, the rest will destroy themselves anyway. Knowledge alone will destroy bootlegging and that other great evil, the dope traffic. This is the only true and natural solution. Closely parallel to the drink question is the dope question. Both are supported by the law of human selfishness. Human selfishness will sell anything, do anything, promote anything, advertise anything if there is money enough in it. It is responsible for our billboards, 50% of which advertising is for articles which will harm you, and 90% of which won't do you any good. Millions are spent to sell you something you don't want. The advertiser thus distributes individual invitations to injure yourself in the nicest, easiest, most dignified, and most expensive manner. The same selfishness applies in the sale of narcotics to minors. It starts at the schoolhouse and ends at the madhouse, the prison, and the grave. But business is business. The one cure for anything is to get the right knowledge to the individual concerned. Traffic of all kinds fears only the real knowledge of the facts in the case. The strength of knowledge is greater than the goodness of ignorance. Fight these problems in the school and the home. Present the truth to the mind of youth, and the mind of youth will solve these problems for all time. The Death of Socrates. A great Greek philosopher tells of death, from the Dialogues of Plato, by B. Jowett, M.A. After an interval of some months or years at Philus, a town of Sicyon, the tale of the last hours of Socrates is narrated by Echecrates and other Philasians by Phaedo, the beloved disciple, Jowett. Many philosophical questions are discussed in prison by Socrates and his friends. Many questions concerning death, suicide, and the proper attitude toward life. Speaking of the other world, the superior world, the upper earth, Socrates tells them the following. Editor. In the first place, the earth, when looked at from above, is like one of those balls which have leather coverings in 12 pieces, and is of diverse colors, of which the colors which painters use on earth are only a sample. But there the whole earth is made up of them, and they are brighter, far, and clearer than ours. There is a purple of wonderful luster, also the radiance of gold, and the white which is in the earth is whiter than any chalk or snow. Of these and other colors the earth is made up, and they are more in number and fairer than the eye of man has ever seen. And the very hollows, of which I was speaking, filled with air and water, are seen like light flashing amid the other colors, and have a color of their own, which gives a sort of unity to the variety of earth. And in this fair region everything that grows, trees and flowers and fruits, are in a like degree fairer than any here. And there are hills and stones in them, in a like degree smoother and more transparent, and fairer in color than are highly valued emeralds and sardonyxes and jaspers, and other gems, which are but minute fragments of them. For there all the stones are like our precious stones, and fairer still. The reason of this is that they are pure and not, like our precious stones, infected and corroded by the corrupt briny elements which coagulate among us, and which breed foulness and disease both in earth and stones, as well as in animals and plants. They are the jewels of the upper earth, which also shines with gold and silver and the like, and they are visible to sight and large and abundant, and found in every region of the earth, and blessed is he who sees them. And upon the earth are animals and men, some in the middle region, others dwelling about the air as we dwell about the sea, others in islands, which the air flows around, near the continent. And in a word, the air is used by them as the water and the sea are by us, and the ether to them what the air is to us. Moreover, the temperament of their seasons is such that they have no disease, and live much longer than we do, and have sight and hearing and smell, and all the other senses in far greater perfection, in the same degree that air is purer than water, or the ether than air. Also they have temples and sacred places in which the gods really dwell, and they hear the voices and receive their answers, and are conscious of them and hold converse with them. And they see the sun, moon, and stars as they really are. And their other blessedness is of a piece of this. I do not mean to affirm that the descriptions which I have given of the soul and her mansions is exactly true. A man of sense ought hardly to say that, but I do say that inasmuch as the soul is shown to be immortal, he may venture to think, not improperly or unworthily, that something of the kind is true. The venture is a glorious one, and he ought to comfort himself with words like these, which is the reason why I have lengthened out the tale. Wherefore I say, let a man be of good cheer about his soul, who has cast away the pleasures and ornaments of the body as alien to him, and rather hurtful in their effects, and has followed after the pleasures of knowledge in this life, who has adorned the soul in her own proper jewels, which are temperance, and justice, and courage, and nobility, and truth. In these arrayed, she is ready to go on her journey to the world below, purgatory-like, first before being led to the upper earth, Ed, when her time comes. Eusymias and Sebes and all the other men will depart at some time or other. Me already, as the tragic poet would say, the voice of fate calls. Soon I must drink the poison, and I think that I had better repair to the bath first, in order that the women may not have the trouble of washing my body after I am dead. Said Crito, but in what way would you have us bury you? In any way what you like. Only you must get hold of me and take care that I do not walk away from you. Then he turned to us and added with a smile, I cannot make Crito believe that I am the same Socrates who have been talking and conducting the argument. He fancies that I am the other Socrates, whom he will soon see a dead body, and he asks, how shall he bury me? And though I have spoken many words in the endeavor to show that when I have drunk the poison I shall leave you and go to the joys of the blessed, these words of mine, with which I have comforted you and myself, have had, as I perceive, no effect upon Crito. And therefore I want you to be surety for me now, as he was surety for me at the trial. But let the promise be of another sort, for he was my surety to the judges that I would remain, but that you must be surety to him that I shall not remain, but go away and depart. And then he will suffer less at my death, and not be grieved when he sees my body being burned or buried. I would not have him sorrow at my hard lot, or say at the burial, thus we lay out Socrates, or thus we follow him to the grave or bury him. For false words are not only evil in themselves, but they infect the soul with evil. Be of good cheer then, my dear Crito, and say that you are burying my body only, and do with that as is usual, and as you think best. Having returned from the bath, the jailer came to him, saying, To you, Socrates, whom I know to be the noblest and gentlest and best of all who ever came to this place, I will not impute the angry feelings of other men who rage and swear at me when, in obedience to the authorities, I bid them drink the poison. Indeed, I am sure that you will not be angry with me, for others, as you are aware, and not I, are the guilty cause. And so fare you well, and try to bear lightly what must needs be. You know my errand. Then bursting into tears, he turned away and went out. Socrates looked at him and said, I return your good wishes, and will do as you bid. Let the cup be brought, if the poison is prepared. If not, let the attendant prepare some. Yet, said Crito, the sun is still upon the hilltops, and many a one has taken the draught late, and after the announcement has been made to him, he has eaten and drunk and indulged in sensual delights. Do not hasten then, there is still time. Socrates said, Yes, Crito, and they of whom you speak are right in doing thus, for they think they will gain by the delay. But I am right in not doing thus, for I do not think I should gain anything by drinking the poison a little later. I should be sparing and saving a life which is already gone. I could only laugh at myself for this. Please, then, to do as I say, and not to refuse me. Crito, when he heard this, made a sign to the servant, and the servant went in and remained for some time, and then returned with the jailer carrying the cup of poison. He handed the cup to Socrates, who in the easiest and gentlest manner, without the least fear or change of color or feature, looking at the man with all his eyes as his manner was, took the cup and said, What do you say about making a libation out of this cup to any god? May I or not? The man answered, We only prepare, Socrates, just so much as we deem enough. I understand, he said. Yet I may and must pray to the gods to prosper my journey from this to that other world. May this, then, which is my prayer, be granted to me. Then, holding the cup to his lips quite readily and cheerfully, he drank off the poison. And hitherto most of us had been able to control our sorrow. But now, when we saw him drinking, and saw too that he had finished the draught, we could no longer forbear. and in spite of myself my own tears were flowing fast, so that I covered my face and wept over myself. For certainly I was not weeping over him, but at the thought of my own calamity in having lost such a companion. Nor was I the first, for Crito, when he found himself unable to restrain his tears, had got up and moved away, and I followed. And at that moment Apollodorus, who had been weeping all the time, broke out into a loud cry which made cowards of us all. Socrates alone retained his calmness. "What is this strange outcry?" he said. "I sent away the women mainly in order that they might not offend in this way, for I have heard that a man should die in peace. Be quiet then and have patience." When we heard that, we were ashamed and refrained our tears, and he walked about until, as he said, his legs began to fail, and then he lay on his back. And the men who gave him the poison now and then looked at his feet and legs, and after a while he pressed his foot hard and asked if he could feel, and he said, "No." And then his leg, and so upwards and upwards, and showed us that he was cold and stiff. And he felt them himself, and said, "When the poison reaches the heart, that will be the end." He was beginning to grow cold about the groin, when he uncovered his face, for he had covered himself up, and said, they were his last words, he said, "Crito, I owe a cock to Asclepius. Will you remember to pay the debt?" "The debt shall be paid," said Crito. "Is there anything else?" There was no answer to this question, but in a minute or two a movement was heard, and the attendants uncovered him. His eyes were set, and Crito closed his eyes and mouth. Such was the end, Echecrates, of our friend, whom I may truly call the wisest and justest and best of all the men whom I have ever known. Were the ancients wiser than we? Do we need the mystery schools? An interview with Manly P. Hall by H.O. Stachan. About every 600 years, human civilization seems to reach a flowering period. Human progress runs in cycles, so to speak. Just as a series of average waves upon the surface of the ocean is always followed by one wave that overtops its predecessors, so with the succession of centuries, every sixth one rises to outstanding cultural heights. This apparent rhythm is now attracting attention once more, because the 20th century, in which we are living, seems to mark another apex in the unfolding story of man's eternal struggle, onward and upward. And the theory is entirely consistent, for civilization's last pinnacle was the Renaissance, which had its beginning in the 14th century. Prior to that, there was a blossom time along about the 7th century, which was preceded by the era of Christ Jesus in the 1st century. 6 centuries before his day saw another brilliant blooming in Greece, when Pythagoras and other intellectual giants walked the earth and gave to mankind the benefits of their erudition, a standard of learning which has stood unrivaled for 26 centuries. But in this our busy, humdrum, sunwise turn of 1926, the average man and woman gives little thought to the considerations of this sort. They take the world for granted, honestly but foolishly believing that we of today represent the very last word in all human knowledge and achievement. Notwithstanding, there is a steadily increasing host of thinking people who are not so self-satisfied and complacent. Particularly is this true here in Southern California, where we are told by those schooled in such matters that a new race is evolving, heralds of a new world and promulgators of a new order that will concern itself with matters far more important than subdivisions and sensations. Old in learning. One of the interesting workers in this vineyard here is Manly P. Hall, a man young in years but old in learning. Not the sort of learning that is highly valued in the marts of today, but the learning of the ancients, which is the foundation of all true wisdom, because it came from the one original source of all learning. This learning is the metaphysical lore at which many so-called wise men nowadays turn up their noses, for they say it is not practical. Because it is not so simple, it is too deep for them. But to return to Mr. Hall, to most persons hereabouts he is best known as pastor of the Church of the People, which meets every Sunday morning in Trinity Auditorium. Each week he discusses there all sorts of subjects ranging from the commonplace to the sublime, with their application to present-day problems, in such a fascinating manner that those who hear him once invariably become regular attendants. Right now, Mr. Hall is concluding a monumental labor, the writing of a book which he has been steadily engaged since 1919, and which bears the almost forbidden title of an encyclopedia outline of Masonic, Hermetic, and Rosicrucian symbolical philosophy. To this is added a treatise on the Kabbalah of the Jews, being an interpretation of the secret teachings concealed within the rituals, allegories, and mysteries of all ages. Hamlet's admonition, "There are more things in heaven and earth," Horatio, "than are dreamed of in your philosophy," might well be blazoned across the title page of Mr. Hall's book. For it is the all but forgotten wisdom of the ancients, which he has resurrected as the result of his studies in countless books and manuscripts, to which the general public has no access. Being very old, these documents are of little use to most people because they hold ancient knowledge to be out of date, and like last year's motor car, therefore to have deteriorated. But in this respect, wisdom differs strikingly from material things. Age cannot wither it, nor custom stale, though people fail to realize that fact. In answering a question as to his immediate purpose in writing such a book, Mr. Hall replied that he hoped through it to bring about an attitude of mind favorable to the reestablishment of the ethical culture of the ancient Greeks. This culture was largely disseminated by the so-called mysteries, which disappeared during the early centuries of the Christian era. Today, great philosophic minds are once more interested in the reestablishment of the mysteries as an institution. Lacking in culture. We're hopelessly lacking in true ethical culture today, said Mr. Hall, in that we do not do right from the principle of right, but rather from the principle of expediency. The science of ethics was the fundamental teaching of the Greek mysteries, and constituted the most perfect system of education ever devised. This ethical message was so vital and informative that candidates actually vied with one another to secure it. But the scholastic curriculums of today are, for the most part, so prosaic and commercially materialistic that it is necessary to pass compulsory attendance laws to keep the children in school. For both children and parents are prone to regard higher education not only a non-essential but even a handicap in the battle of life. Everywhere the lack of ethics is painfully felt today. Many people are trying to analyze the defects of our social fabric. Crass materialism is the one and only answer. The mysteries of antiquity were dedicated to the gods, and every modern art and science had its origin in the temple. Mathematics and medicine were first sacred sciences, created as methods for honoring the gods by serving mankind. In this connection, recall that Gutenberg, the father of printing, designed the first movable type in 1445 for the express purpose of printing the Bible. Painting and sculpture originally grew out of a desire to perpetuate the forms and features of the gods and heroes, while music and drama received their early impulses from being integral parts of religious worship. All of these higher, finer, and cultural activities man developed to express his spiritual ideals, but not necessarily theological concepts. Religion does not dispute or theorize. It worships and adores the fundamental verities of life. But today our churches, through their varying creeds, unfortunately have fomented an untold amount of prejudice. And prejudice is a destructive force. The prejudiced mind is incapable of logical or reasonable thought. Creeds are merely excrescences upon the body of religion. Creeds inhibit the mental faculties and rational powers of all who become involved in the limitations of dogma. Universities, churches, and scientific bodies, exhibiting an exaggerated reverence for creeds and precedents, paralyze the mental initiatives of the representatives and followers. The ancient mysteries. Every world religion is a partial revelation of the secret doctrine of the ancient mysteries. Ante-Nicene Christianity was a school of the mysteries and, as such, promulgated a secret doctrine, scarcely a vestige of which is to be found in modern Christianity. The secret doctrine of Christianity even Christ concealed from the multitudes, revealing it only to an illuminated few. It is recorded in Matthew that the disciples asked Jesus why he spoke to the people in parables. And he answered and said unto them, Because it is given unto you to understand the mysteries of heaven. But unto them it is not given. Everything that has been revealed to us is merely an imperfect symbol of a great spiritual fact that is revealed in its entirety only to those initiated into the mysteries of nature. The Greek mythology taught today in our public schools is nothing but the initiation rituals of the Greek mysteries. Plato, the greatest of all philosophers, was an initiate. He had been inducted into the lore and practices of the Eleusinian mysteries. The priests of the temple revealed to him all they knew, and his writings are merely veiled simplifications of the teachings of the mystery schools. Aristotle and Euclid were also initiates. Pythagoras, after visiting the seats of 14 great religions of antiquity, from Greece to India, declared them all to be monotheistic, a statement which disrupts modern concepts of pagan theology. Centers of education. The mysteries were really the great educational centers of the ancient world. In Greece, Egypt, Chaldea, and other countries they played the part of school, clinic, church, and home all in one. Their standard of morality was the highest ever known. Of course, in later years they became polluted with undesirable influences like reputable institutions are known to suffer even in our own days, and gradually declined. It is Mr. Hall's firm belief that if the educational system of the ancient mysteries could be reestablished, it would solve many problems which appear to be unsolvable to the unilluminated mind of today, because the mysteries represented a synthesis of philosophy, science, and religion. They revealed the underlying harmony that pervades all three, whereas so many people today regard them as hopelessly irreconcilable. And so it is that Mr. Hall feels we must return to the original doctrine, another instance of the first being last, if we would extricate ourselves from the entanglements into which useless creedal conflicts have betrayed the modern world. The time is again at hand for the periodic resurgence of reason and learning, for 600 years have elapsed since the last great illumination of the world. The time is again at hand for the periodic resurgence of reason and learning, for 600 years have elapsed since the last great illumination of the world. As a contribution to this end, Mr. Hall is bringing out his compendium, which summarizes the long-forgotten and dust-encrusted wisdom of the past. The entire work is amplified with numerous quotations from ancient, medieval, and modern authorities, many of them from unpublished manuscripts and priceless books long out of print.